Sadly, our St. Mary's community is prevented from meeting together until this terrible affliction, the coronavirus COVID-19, is brought under control. Rather than this being a Laetare or Be Glad Sunday, where we light the rose-colored candle for Lent and rejoice that the better part of Lent is behind us, and we have just a few more weeks until Christ's resurrection, we're focused, to some extent, on a Lenten penance that we don't see the end of. It recalls the blindness that is at the center of today's gospel, the physical blindness of the man born blind, around which this detailed story is woven, and other kinds of non-physical blindness, the kind that Jesus is most focused on. As we face this crisis together, the blindness I'm most aware of is, first of all, my own, a spiritual, a practical blindness. I want life in our church community to go on as usual, with people coming together to plan upcoming celebrations and other events, to celebrate Mass, to break bread together, to bring the Eucharist from Mass to others who aren't present for the celebration. I mistakenly want to think that there really is no danger that I might bring something deadly to those absent, who are absent because they are too frail or vulnerable to be in church with others. I make myself blind because I want life to go on as it always has, where I can be the one to bring Christ to others, where I can visit those in a nursing home, where I can bring a smile to someone who is isolated. But then there are those who warn of the danger of bringing an unwanted guest into someone's presence, an invisible one I might pick up from a doorknob, a gas station pump handle, a stair rail. They exercise their civil and religious authority to isolate me. I resist this truth, but then I realize that I must surrender to this truth, assuring that the chain of passing on an illness has no chance of being completed. Thousands of lives, including those I love, will be saved. I must be cured of this blindness I suffer from. Jesus says in our gospel, I came into the world so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see and insist on only their own vision might become blind. If I want to continue seeing as I want to see, then I become blind to the truth. John's gospel story is long and detailed, but what stood out for me this week was the discussion of the causes and cures of blindness, and whose blindness still remains. Jesus and the disciples see the man born blind, and the disciples want to know whose fault his blindness is. Jesus tells his listeners that neither the man nor his parents were at fault. This particular blind man has come to us so that you can be made to see. Now, open your eyes and watch this. Jesus spits in the mud and creates mud to put on the man's eyes. It is in this act, spitting on the dirt and rubbing mud on the man's eyes, that causes Jesus to run afoul of the temple authorities in this story. It was a Sabbath, and on the Sabbath, one was allowed to do no work at all. Jesus' mixing dirt and saliva and spreading it on the man's eyelids was work. Had Jesus just sat still and told the man that his sight had been restored, we might never have gotten the real exchange between the authorities and Jesus. But he did it, and we get the rest of the story. They begin to question the man, claiming that Jesus is a sinner. But the man says, I don't know if he's a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. The leaders insist that they have no idea where Jesus comes from. He's not like us. So who was blind? This story points out a very important question for us to consider ourselves. The question is not, what if it is not God, and I believe that it is, which we do all the time, but what if it is God, and I believe that it is not? That is the one question the authorities forgot to ask. They were so sure of everything, so don't tell us that some completely different thing might also be from God. And that's the important thing here, to consider both and, not either or. Right or wrong, I have my mind made up what constitutes living as a Christian. I do not, however, know the mind of God. No one does. But sometimes I let my self-important Pharisee-like nature make me think that I'm God. How God chooses to do God's work, and through whom God chooses to do the work of salvation, is not for me to determine. The temple authorities then thought God could not work through sinners or on sinners. What if it is God, and I don't see? Who would be blind then? As we live through this time and forge new directions for the good of all of us, let none of us be blinded by making up our minds and not listening to God's good and healing advice sent to us through others. Let us all work with our eyes wide open to renew and strengthen our community, even in these difficult times.